In the space of 4 weeks, 12 elderly people walk into a police station and give the same statement. Not one of them has telephoned the others. Several of them have not spoken in years. 2 of them, accounts suggest, had not been on speaking terms since before the war. They are all describing the death of the same man, a farm laborer who disappeared from their village in the South Wales coalfield in 1934. A man the entire community told the police had emigrated. He had not emigrated. The people telling the story are in their 70s and 80s now. They were teenagers and young married couples when it happened. They have carried it through a depression, a world war, the closing of the pits, and the burial of almost everyone else who was standing there that night. And then, 37 years later, almost simultaneously, they put it down. This is a story about how much a village can hold, and about the exact moment when holding it stops being worth the wait. Start with 1934, because 1934 is why this works. The South Wales valleys are in the worst of it. In some towns, more than half the insured men are out of work. The household means test has been running for 3 years, and it is loathed. An inspector comes to your door, counts your furniture, asks what your son earns, and reduces your relief accordingly. Families break up over it. Sons leave home, so their wages stop counting against the household. That same September, at Gresford in the north, an explosion kills 266 men, and most of the bodies are never brought out. That is the texture of the year. Death is close, work is scarce, and people are constantly leaving. Into that, put a farm laborer. Accounts of this case describe a man in his 30s, unmarried, no children, no parents living locally. He works casual, hedging, harvest, a few weeks at one farm, a few at the next. He lodges rather than rents. He is known to everyone and belongs to no one. Understand what that means in practice. A man like that generates almost no paper. No employer files a P45. No landlord takes him to court. No wife reports him missing. There is no national missing persons register to consult. If he stops appearing on the road between farms, the only record that he ever existed is the memory of the people who saw him last. And in the autumn of 1934, those people decide what that memory is going to say. The story is that he went away. Sometimes it is England. Sometimes it is America. In the retellings that survive, nobody is certain which, and that vagueness is not a flaw in the cover story. It is the cover story working exactly as intended. Because in 1934, in that village, it is the single most believable sentence anyone can say about a missing young man. Historians estimate that something in the region of 400,000 people left Wales between the wars. Whole streets in the valleys empty out towards Slough, Coventry, Dagenham, Birmingham. There are chapels that lose a third of their congregation in a decade. If you tell a police constable that a single laborer with no family has gone looking for work in England, you are not asking him to believe something extraordinary. You are telling him the most ordinary thing that happens in Wales that year. So there is no search. There is no dredging of the river, no digging of a field, no appeal in the local paper. A constable, accounts suggest, writes a line in a book and closes it. And here is the part that should stop you. This was not one person lying. This was a village producing a consistent account. Dozens of people, asked separately over months and years by neighbors, relatives, the odd official, all landing on the same shrug. He went away. Nobody had to be sworn to secrecy, because nobody had to be told. They all knew what the answer was. The question is what they were answering it about. We should be careful about the word conspiracy, because it implies a meeting, and there is no evidence of a meeting. What sociologists who study these cases describe is something quieter and much harder to break. Everyone knows. Everyone knows everyone knows. And nobody is willing to be the first to say it out loud. In a village of a few hundred people, the cost of speaking is not abstract. The men involved are your brother-in-law, your neighbor, the man who carries your coal, the deacon who reads at your chapel. Their children sit next to yours in school. If you go to the police, you are not reporting a stranger. You are removing 3 or 4 households from a community that is already hollowing out, and you are doing it in front of everyone, and you will still be living there on Monday. So the silence holds. And then history keeps giving it reasons to hold. 1939. The young men go to war, and some of the witnesses do not come back. The 1950s. the story ages into something that feels less like a crime and more like a fact about the place, the way a landscape has a fact about it. The 1960s, the pits start closing in earnest, and in 1966 the tip above Aberdeen comes down on a school and kills 144 people, 116 of them children, and the inquiry that follows tells the Valley something they already suspected about how much the authorities were worth. None of that makes anyone more inclined to walk into a police station. By 1971, the generation that stood in that field is nearly gone, which means, almost certainly, so is whoever did it. Then it breaks. According to the accounts that circulate, it begins with one person, an elderly resident who has decided, for reasons that were never fully recorded, that they are not taking it any further than this. They give a statement. It is long, it is specific, and it names other people who were present. And then, within days, another one comes. Then another. 12 in a month. The hook is that they came independently, and in one narrow sense that is true. There is no evidence they coordinated, no meeting, no agreed text. But we should be honest about what independent means in a village. In a place that size, the news that someone has finally spoken travels before the constable has finished writing it down. And what that news carries is not instruction. It is permission. The thing that held 12 people silent for 37 years was not a threat. It was the belief that they would be the only one. The moment that belief fails, it fails for everybody at once. This is a well-documented pattern in how collective silences collapse. Nobody moves for decades, and then the whole structure goes in a month, because the first defection converts a shameful betrayal into an ordinary act. Now picture the detective. He has 12 statements from witnesses in their 70s and 80s, broadly agreeing, describing an event from 1934. He has no body, no scene, no forensics, and a suspect list that is mostly buried in the chapel graveyard. Under the law of England and Wales, there is no time limit on murder. The case is technically alive. The question is whether anything can be done with it. The most interesting question in this whole story is not what happened in 1934. It is the timing. Why that month? Why not 10 years earlier or 10 years later? Nobody can read the minds of 12 dead witnesses, so what follows is explanation rather than proof. But three things change in Britain in the 6 years before 1971, and all three of them lower the price of talking. The first is the rope. Murder carried the death penalty in England and Wales until the 1965 Abolition Act, which was made permanent at the end of 1969. That matters enormously for a witness. Before 1969, telling a policeman what you saw in a field in 1934 could plausibly end with a neighbor on a scaffold. After 1969, the worst outcome you can trigger is a prison sentence for a man in his 80s, if he is even alive. The second is a change almost nobody outside the law remembers. Until 1967, England and Wales had an offense called misprision of felony. Knowing a serious crime had been committed and failing to report it was itself a crime. The Criminal Law Act 1967 abolished it. Before that, a witness walking in after 30 years was, at least in theory, confessing to an offense of their own. Afterwards, they were not. The third is simply mortality. By 1971, the people who would have suffered most from the truth are dead, and the ones left are close enough to the end to want the thing off them. We cannot know whether any of the 12 had heard of the Criminal Law Act, but the law had quietly stopped punishing them for speaking, and 4 years later, they spoke. So could it have been prosecuted? Not hopelessly, and there is a real Welsh precedent for that. In 1954, a farmer named Michael Onufredczyk was convicted of murdering his business partner at a farm in Carmarthenshire. The body was never found. The conviction rested on circumstantial evidence and on the sheer impossibility of the innocent explanations, and it held up on appeal. It established, in Welsh soil, that you do not need a corpse to prove a killing. But that case had blood traces, an active investigation weeks old, and a living defendant. A 1971 file on a 1934 death has none of that. Testimony given at 80 about something seen at 19 is not worthless, but it is porous, and any defense barrister alive would take it apart. What you saw, what you were told afterwards, and what the village settled on as the version, all fused together across 4 decades into a single confident memory. and you cannot charge the dead, which leaves us with the honest part. Cases like this one live in a difficult category. The details are held mostly in local memory and later retellings rather than in accessible case papers, and specifics on names, dates, and what any file actually concluded should be treated as uncertain unless you can see the document. What is not uncertain is the pattern. It is documented elsewhere, most starkly in Skidmore, Missouri, in 1981, where a man was shot dead in his truck in the middle of the morning in front of dozens of townspeople, and no witness would say who fired. No one was ever charged. A community can absolutely agree, without ever agreeing anything, to make one death disappear. What the 12 of them proved, in the end, was not who did it. It was that nothing had ever actually been forgotten. A village had simply agreed on a sentence and then carried the real one, intact, for 37 years, until the law and the graveyard between them made it cheap enough to say out loud. If a story about the things communities agree not to know is worth 12 minutes of your evening, there is more of this on the channel.